If it's Wednesday, Hunter Biden speaks out. The president's son defends his father outside the Capitol while defying a congressional subpoena to testify behind closed doors. As House Republicans move forward with votes to open an impeachment inquiry into President Biden and hold Hunter in contempt. Plus, one of America's most politically potent issues will soon be at the center of another Supreme Court showdown. The High Court agrees to take up a high-stakes abortion pill case that could decide the fate of one of the nation's most widely used abortion medications, just months before the presidential election. And in a rare rebuke, President Biden warns Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he and his government's military tactics must change as the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza grows more dire and calls for a ceasefire grow louder. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake in Washington, where the House is set to vote later this evening to formally begin an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. The vote comes as the central figure of that inquiry, Hunter Biden, continues to defy a House Republican subpoena calling for him to sit for a closed-door deposition. The president's son gave rare public comments this morning on the Hill, denying any wrongdoing by his father and reiterating his offer to testify only at a public hearing.
I'm here today to make sure that the House committee's illegitimate investigations of my family do not proceed on distortions, manipulated evidence, and lies. And I'm here today to acknowledge that I've made mistakes in my life and wasted opportunities and privileges I was afforded. For that, I'm responsible. For that, I'm accountable. And for that, I'm making amends. Let me state as clearly as I can, my father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad, and certainly not as an artist.
The White House commended Hunter Biden's comments, calling them powerful and forceful. But the House Republicans leading the impeachment effort now say they'll proceed with contempt of Congress proceedings against the younger Biden. Here was their response to the president's son's refusal to sit for a deposition.
This is a concern. This is about public corruption at the highest levels. And, the president's son does not get to set the rules. I mean, he's had a pretty good run with the Department of Justice, with the IRS, and with the FBI. But these two committees are going to hold firm. We have taken steps to go by the book in this investigation. Now we're in the phase where we do the depositions. And, what he did today is unacceptable.
Now, despite Congressman Comer's claims, Republicans have yet to put forth any actual evidence implicating President Biden of any wrongdoing. But as we said with previous impeachment inquiries of then-President Trump, impeachment is political, not legal. And while an impeachment inquiry does not guarantee actual articles of impeachment be written or voted on, Republicans may be playing with fire as they head down this road, especially less than 11 months before Election Day. As Chuck Todd writes today, this impeachment inquiry may end up meaningless to voters. Joining me now is the aforementioned Chuck Todd, NBC News chief political analyst, who I'll speak to in just a minute about this. And also with me is Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill and Monica Alba at the White House. So, Ryan, what happens next for Hunter and this contempt resolution? It seems unlikely that'll get settled before January.
Yeah, you're right, Garrett. That's a process. They have to write and create a report. It has to be voted on a committee, and then it has to be voted on by the full House of Representatives. So it's likely that we won't see that contempt of Congress charge move until the new year. But to be clear, it's going to happen. House Republicans made it clear today that what Hunter Biden did today in no meaningful way answers the subpoena that they're looking for. They don't buy his argument that he's willing to testify publicly. They want this process to play out the way most congressional investigations do play out, with a closed-door deposition first, out of the realm of cameras so that it can't be a circus, so that they can ask substantive questions over a lengthy period of time. And then if he wants to do the public hearing, he's welcome to do so. So they control the way this process works. They're in the majority. They set the standard Sanders for the subpoena. And now that they're going to have the backing of a formal impeachment inquiry, they have a lot more legal ground to stand on as well, Garrett.
So let's talk about this vote in the next hour. Right now, we know of one Republican who will vote against formalizing the impeachment inquiry. Kevin McCarthy rolled this out by fiat, basically, back in September. What has changed between then and now to get Republicans to the point where they're confident this will pass?
Well, I do think that the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, has made this a priority. He's reached out to some of these members that had concerns about the impeachment inquiry moving forward and leaned on them to say that this is a vote that they need because the congressional investigators do feel that they are running into roadblocks when it comes to getting this, the subpoenas for documents and witness testimony complied with. But I also think there's been a calculation that's changed just in terms of the facts on the ground, and the most important being the mounting legal issues that Hunter Biden is dealing with. You know, this latest indictment where he faces a whole series of tax charges, the salacious details connected to it, that just gives Republicans fodder and to a certain degree gives them cover in their districts to say, you know what, there's a whole lot of smoke here. It's worth it for us to continue on in this investigation to determine whether or not there's any fire. And I know right away people that are supporters of the president are listening to me and saying, but Joe Biden's name isn't mentioned at all in the indictment. And I do think that is an important point. But as you rightly pointed out in your open, Garrett, impeachment is not a legal proceeding. It is a political proceeding. And there's no doubt that that latest indictment provided Republicans the political cover they need to cast that vote later today.
But to the degree that it's political, it can cut both ways. We saw this with the Trump impeachments. You saw it with the Bill Clinton impeachment. Are House Republicans wary of the possibility that at the end of the day, it might be them who faces the political backlash for an impeachment that doesn't go the way they think it will, especially if they don't get the goods they are so certain are there?
Well, if they're not, Garrett, they should be. And I do think they're going to win this today. But they've really set the stage for a showdown early on in this new year that's going to fall right in the midst of a presidential campaign where it's going to be make or break. They've now opened the door to, with no more excuses to find the conclusive evidence to file those articles of impeachment against President Biden. And those same Republicans that represent moderate districts that President Biden won, and some of those districts could potentially become a lot bluer after the court ruling in New York, are going to have a much more difficult time voting for an actual article of impeachment. And Republicans have now set themselves up that if they don't take the step of articles of impeachment, they've inherently exonerated the president. So this is a dicey gamble that they're presenting and basically laying on the table right now. And you can bet the Biden campaign is not going to just let us all forget about the fact that they opened an impeachment inquiry if they don't take the next step of actually filing articles of impeachment. Because the other point that's, I think, a very important part of all this, Garrett, is that even if they get articles of impeachment through the House, they are dead on arrival in the Senate. So it would just be a political exercise under any circumstance, but they've now set them up that they better go through with it or else there could be consequences.
Yeah, if the evidence never shows up, I'm of the mind that the White House could almost dare House Republicans to keep putting this forward down the line, force them to take a politically, potentially suicidal vote. But what do I know? I'm a Capitol Hill reporter. For that, I turn to a White House reporter, Monica Alba, who can hopefully provide us a little more detail on this. So, Mon, what do we know about the White House strategy on dealing with the Hunter Biden indictments that Ryan pointed out have created the smoke and the potential political fire that the president has to deal with, which is his own impeachment inquiry?
Well, both of you Capitol Hill reporters definitely have good enough insight into this. And we can just rewind back to September when it was then House Speaker McCarthy who started this whole process. And at that moment, the White House said, oh, sure, they're going to bring this inquiry, but they're never going to hold a vote on it. And that is exactly the moment that we are in today. And that really does tell you a lot about this process and about their thinking. Remember, they even stood up a war room at the time to deal with this potential. But they thought because of the conversation and the political climate at the moment that just opening the door to this inquiry because of the demands of some in the Republican conference was something they were doing, but that they weren't maybe going to follow through with an actual vote. So fast forward to today, and it is notable in those comments this morning that we heard from Hunter Biden specifically, this is something that the White House usually, when they hear the words Hunter Biden, they almost have like a knee-jerk reaction line, which is, oh, we're not going to weigh in. We defer to his personal attorneys, we refer you to the Department of Justice. Today, they're not doing that. And even the White House press secretary weighed in a way that she doesn't normally, saying that the president was certainly aware of what his son was going to say today outside of the Capitol. Listen to a little bit more from the briefing earlier today.
The president was certainly familiar with what his son was going to say. And I think what you saw was from the heart from his son. And you've heard me say this. You've heard the president say this. When it comes to the president and the first lady, they are proud of him continuing to rebuild his life. They are proud of their son.
And that's really been the line from the White House, and I think what you can expect to continue to hear them say. As for the actual impeachment vote, this is something they're going to just continue to drum that point that there isn't any specific evidence that's emerged yet that ties Hunter Biden's business dealings to his father. Garrett.
I'm interested in the different responses here because there's kind of the White House part of it, there's the campaign part of it, and as you pointed out, there's also the executive mansion family part of it in terms of how the president views dealing with his son on this issue. Monica, we're going to have a lot of time to explore this going forward. Thank you for your reporting. And I turn now to our colleague Chuck Todd. Chuck, you have a piece out today saying why this impeachment might not matter. Right. For those who haven't read it, why mightn't it?
Well, because this is sort of a weak impeachment. We've taken impeachment now and turned it into a campaign tactic. Mm-hmm. If you think about, I've lived through 3 impeachments now, professionally, in my lifetime. And in all the other 3, whatever you thought about the decision, there was an agreed upon incident that didn't take place.
A set of facts.
Right. There was Bill Clinton had an affair with an intern. Donald Trump made a phone call and threatened to withhold funds.
You called it perfect.
Right. And Donald Trump gave a speech on the ellipse that called for these folks to march in the Capitol and all these. Everybody agreed. The disagreement was whether it rose to the political death penalty. Mm-hmm. This is the first impeachment where we're just throwing it around, and the Republicans can't agree on what it is about Joe Biden that is impeachable here. Now, of course, you've laid it off pretty well. What's impeachable? Whatever a majority in the House thinks it is. That's the rule, whether you like it or not. And it is pretty clear to me that this is really driven simply by Donald Trump, who's trying to blur his own resume.
If Donald Trump didn't have 2 impeachments, would Joe Biden be facing this impeachment inquiry?
Of course not. Not at all. Frankly, if Donald Trump only had 1 of them, I don't know if he faces it, to be honest. And I'm going to answer a question I think you were going to ask earlier, which is, I really think this impeachment is simply designed to be a distraction from the trials in the spring, because the timing of this, you're sitting there going, well, this makes no sense unless it does make sense. Mm-hmm. And you realize, a Senate trial that will get dismissed in a day will at least distract for a day from Trump, and that's all Trump cares about.
Well, and I covered the 2019 impeachment, and Democrats were so keen to try to get that done before the real start of the 2020 political season. This is the opposite of that, and this is how much can you draw it out. You were nodding along when Ryan was talking about how do they get out of this if it's not an acquittal. I'm obsessed with that question. I mean, how do you get off this train once you start down?
They can't, because Donald Trump won't let them.
Do you think it's because Donald Trump won't let them, or
Correct.
because they fear what their own voters... Well, functionally, it's the same thing,
I was just going to say, that's what I mean.
What their voters will do to them if they somehow do anything that looks like an acquittal.
Yeah, well, we didn't find enough. Mm-hmm. Or, what do you mean? This is what's wrong with the Republican Party. You're weak, right? You could just picture what Trump would say. The constituents would echo it, right? His base. And that's... So they've set themselves up here. They can't, they can't get out of it. So they're literally damned if they do, damned if they don't. I don't think it's going to end up, this is why I think it's going to end up being meaningless. I think it's going to get lost in reality. I think most people aren't paying attention. They're like, oh yeah, it's just an impeachment. It's just, this is the equivalent if Democrats had decided to impeach Trump over the emoluments clause.
Right,
and that he was in the hotel. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a technical violation, but it's ticky-tack. I don't even know if this even rises to that.
Let me challenge your thesis. What if it matters, but in a different way than we think? What if Hunter Biden testifies and he's compelling and sympathetic figure, and Joe Biden can come out and say, if you've got the votes, go ahead. Let's vote for my impeachment. Go ahead, I dare. Put it on the floor. Is there room? Is this White House that deft to turn this around? I don't
think there's any downside to any of the theatrics that come with impeachment for the Biden campaign. In fact, this is what I think makes this an absolute... This is proof to me that way too many people live in way too many of their own information bubbles. If all you do is watch one cable channel and listen to one set of algorithms of what you get on your news feed, you think it's perfectly, of course you're going to do this. In fact, it would be ridiculous if you didn't impeach. I mean, my goodness, they have been, this information ecosystem has claimed all sorts of nefarious things. So by not doing it, it kind of looks absurd. So I do think we're in this, they don't realize how ridiculous this looks to mainstream America.
That's why you always watch the cable news 4-box with Sunday Ticket in a separate monitor, right,
We watch the 4-box without sound.
There it is.
Trust me.
Chuck Todd, thank you for your analysis on this as always. And joining me now is Democratic Congressman from New York, Dan Goldman. He knows a little something about this topic. He was the lead counsel during the first impeachment of then-President Trump. So, Congressman, I'll pick up there. Republicans have been investigating Biden and the idea that his son's businesses are connected to him for months now, years arguably. Does anything change today once this inquiry is formalized?
Well, it certainly is a formal step where every single Republican who votes for this is endorsing the idea of impeaching Joe Biden. And that's why you have to look at what they have developed over the last 12 months. It is not for lack of evidence, Garrett. They have hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, dozens of hours of witness testimony from numerous government witnesses. Multiple executive branch agencies under the administration have turned over documents. They have plenty of materials. They just don't have any evidence connecting Joe Biden to anything that his son was doing. And it doesn't change now because there's really nothing that material that they haven't gotten. They just don't have the evidence. And if they wanted more, they had Hunter Biden this morning ready to give them more evidence and testimony, and they refused to take it. So it is a little rich and ironic for them to be claiming that they need to open up a formal impeachment inquiry to get more evidence when they rejected evidence just this morning from the central witness in the case.
To be fair, in 2019, you guys made everybody appear for a private deposition before you had any public hearing. So that was the standard in 2019. I want to ask you about that impeachment as it relates to this one, too. And maybe this predates your involvement with the process or in terms of where you were in the decision making. But what was the bar for Democrats when you decided to bring the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump the first time? Do you think there's a threshold that Republicans need to meet to move this from inquiry to some further step?
Absolutely. And you know, you'll hear misinformation and gaslighting from the Republicans. But the reality is that we brought in 17 government witnesses, all of whom had firsthand knowledge of Ukraine, of Trump's dealings with Ukraine, of Rudy Giuliani in Ukraine. And we demonstrated pretty convincingly, even to Senate Republicans who voted to acquit, that we proved the case that Donald Trump abused the power of his office in order to benefit his election and his re-election campaign. And that is an abuse of power. Here, I don't even know what the allegations are. When you ask Chairman Comer to identify one specific piece of evidence, the only thing he comes up with is Burisma, which dates back to that 2019 impeachment because that was the investigation that Trump wanted Zelensky to do and extorted him about. But that has been debunked over and over and over again. And in fact, the removal of that prosecutor general was bad for Hunter Biden and Burisma.
Yeah,
so
we already had
there's
that
nothing here. And there's just absolutely no theory of the case here that I can identify that has any basis in any evidence. There are a lot of accusations, there are a lot of allegations, and there are a lot of strong words for Hunter Biden, but there's no evidence to support an impeachment of the president of the United States, which is Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden.
This is shaping up to be the third impeachment inquiry in 5 years. Are you worried that this is going to become the new normal in politics?
I'm very worried. I absolutely. This is a gross abuse of the constitutional power of the impeachment clause. You know, in the 116th Congress, during the Ukraine impeachment, the Speaker resisted calls for impeachment for a very long time until the abuse of power related to Ukraine emerged as such a clear-cut abuse of power. But the Democrats did not go forward to impeach Trump based on obstruction of justice that was overwhelmingly clear in the Mueller report. And so the Democrats were very careful about what merited impeachment. The Republicans are doing this for political retribution at Donald Trump's direction, to even the score and give him something to talk about in the election. And even Representative Troy Niels admitted that today, that this is all about Trump in 2024. That is an abuse of congressional authority, and that is really, really unbecoming and improper.
For the sake of argument, let's just accept that as true for this conversation, the idea that this is done at Donald Trump's behest or his willingness to bully the Republican conference into starting this inquiry. Does Congress need to make it harder to start down this process of impeachment, given how severe the consequences are, how divisive it is for the country? Do we need to reconsider how easy it is to start an impeachment inquiry or to take a political one all the way to the finish line?
Well, I think what ultimately is going to happen is that the initial impeachment in the House of Representatives is not going to carry the weight that it should. But impeachment, because of how trials work in the Senate and the need for 2/3 to convict, is now rendered almost useless, because it's impossible to imagine a scenario where any president is convicted in the Senate by 2/3, given the partisanship that we see over there. So on the one hand, actually getting impeached in the House becomes too easy, and on the other hand, getting convicted in the Senate is too hard, and so it really loses its efficacy as a check and as a point of accountability against the President of the United States.
Speaker McCarthy rolled out this inquiry in September, but didn't have the votes to formalize the inquiry. Speaker Johnson is doing so now. Did the facts change in that time, or did the politics change in that time?
None of the facts changed, Garrett, and you're just seeing a more and more desperate Republican majority trying to drum up some facts to support their specious allegations. And you have them misleadingly telling the American people that Joe Biden received money from his brother, when in truth it was the repayment of a loan, or that Joe Biden paid for Hunter Biden, gave money to Hunter Biden, or vice versa, when it relates to car payments. There's nothing there. No evidence has changed, and none since that first public and only public hearing, when Jonathan Turley, the Republican star witness, acknowledged and stated in the first 5 minutes that there is insufficient evidence for impeachment right now. There's no more evidence now. And the irony here is that they're claiming that we need an inquiry because of stonewalling by the administration. The only thing they point to is a letter from the White House counsel's office related to a request for the former White House counsel to testify about the classified documents, which has nothing to do with this investigation, and 2 low-level Department of Justice career officials who never testify before Congress and whose supervisors and superiors have already testified, those who make the decisions. The rest of what they're saying has already been turned over, including 75,000 pages from the National Archives dating back to then Vice President Biden's tenure. So there's nothing even that they claim they need that they haven't gotten. They have gotten all of the materials that they need. They just don't have evidence, and that's what the problem is.
Congressman Dan Goldman, we will see where this all goes. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Garrett.
And coming up, details on the closely watched abortion pill case that the Supreme Court just agreed to take up next year, and how a ruling could reshape the fight for reproductive rights. That story is next. Plus, a major shift in tone and messaging from President Biden, offering his harshest criticism yet of Israel's offensive in Gaza. We're on the ground with the latest on the war against Hamas ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The question of abortion access is now back with the Supreme Court, as the High Court announced this morning that it will be taking up the legal battle over the availability of a common medication abortion drug. It's the court's first big case on the issue of abortion since it ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade about a year and a half ago. The case centers around a challenge to the longstanding FDA approval of the drug mifepristone. Earlier this year, a federal judge in Texas sided with an anti-abortion group in its attempt to take the drug off the market by suspending FDA approval that had been in place for more than 20 years. The Supreme Court already stepped in to put a stay on that decision while weighing the case, as well as an appeals court reversal of more recent approvals made by the FDA, which included expanding the cutoff point for taking the drug and the ability to receive it through the mail. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett joins me now. So, Laura, is this a case about abortion, a case about medical regulations? Exactly how does what the court's considering here potentially affect abortion access?
So, Gary, I think the best way to look at it is this is no longer a case about sort of a red light, green light, will the pill be on the market or not? This is now a case about how easy is it going to be to get that pill. Because of the way it's now come up, it's been teed up to the Supreme Court, the issues are a lot more narrow. And that was part of why the Supreme Court said to the lower courts, you go back and you do this the proper way. And so it wound up now at the Supreme Court. And what it's looking at is whether the pill can come through the mail or whether you have to go to get it in a doctor's office, whether a doctor is the only one that can prescribe it, and how far into your pregnancy you can take it. So they're really discrete issues, but obviously this is the most commonly used abortion pill in the country, so the stakes are pretty high for people.
Maybe this is a dumb question, but I read Dobbs. I thought the whole point of that decision was to send anything related to abortion back to the states. Why is this a Supreme Court issue of federal issues? Because we're talking about sending things through the mail?
It's a great issue, not a dumb question at all. So in Dobbs, the whole issue there was whether the states were able to criminalize abortion. Are they able to regulate it? In that way, the Supreme Court said, yes, we are handing this issue back to the states. States, you do whatever you want. You make up your own rules. However, at the same time, the FDA is the one who's in the driver's seat when it comes to giving the yay or nay to federally regulated drugs like mifepristone. And so this drug has been on the market for a long time. And in that respect, that's where the Justice Department has a role to play and has a role to play in defending drugs that are challenged. And so it is sort of this odd confluence. But the pill has been on the market and has stayed on the market and has been shipped through the mail regardless of what, your individual state has decided to do on the ground.
So big picture, this is going to be the first big abortion-related case that the court takes up post-Dobbs. How does the post-Dobbs landscape that we all live in now play into however they're going to look at this issue?
Well, it's interesting. Since Dobbs has come down, the use of the abortion pill has actually sort of taken center stage because even for places that might be a red state and you can't get the procedure in person, for instance, that hasn't stopped blue states from shipping those pills all over the place. And so it really has sort of illuminated how the importance of the abortion pill for so many people. But remember, Garrett, you know this as well as I do, Supreme Court decisions come out the last week of June. And so if the Supreme Court decides to actually weigh in here, say they don't dismiss it on standing, but say they actually dig in here and issue a decision that takes this pill off, at least some portion of the market or makes it harder to get in the middle of a campaign for presidential season, I think that is going to be a remarkable moment for the country.
Yeah, a decision a couple weeks before the party's political conventions really sets the tone for the fall there, no matter how you slice it. Laura Jarrett, thank you for your reporting on that.
Sure.
And turning now to a different abortion legal case that we've been following out of Texas this week. Late Monday, the Texas Supreme Court ruled against Kate Cox, a pregnant Dallas-area mother of two who was seeking an exception to the state's strict abortion ban in order to end her high-risk pregnancy. Cox's doctors had told her that her fetus has a rare, fatal condition and had advised her to terminate the pregnancy in order to preserve her health and her future fertility. A judge had initially granted Cox's request before the state then stepped in and blocked the order. Earlier this week, Cox left Texas to seek abortion care outside of the state. But as nationwide attention on this case has grown, Texas Republicans in Washington have remained tight-lipped about the struggle facing one of their constituents. Take a listen to what happened when I tried to press Texas Senator Ted Cruz about this case, the talk of Texas, in the halls of the Senate this morning.
Senator, what's your view on the Kate Cox case in Texas?
Just follow press roll.
We've done that several times, Senator. It seems weird that you won't comment on it at all. You have absolutely nothing to say about this case?
Sorry.
Most people in Texas are talking about it every day. Do you believe the law is being enforced as it's supposed to be?
We've heard just about as much from the other Senator, John Cornyn, as well. Up next, we're sticking with this story and digging deeper into the politics of abortion access in post-Roe America and how the hot-button issue could shape some of 2024's most critical election contests. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
We have no choice. To fulfill our constitutional responsibility, we have to take the next step. We're not making a political decision. It's not. It's a legal decision. We're not going to prejudge the outcome of this. We can't, because, again, it's not a political calculation. We're following the law, and we are the rule of law team, and I'm going to hold to that. That's my commitment.
The rule of law team. Welcome back. That was House Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday, claiming the impeachment inquiry being voted on in just a few minutes is a legal, not a political endeavor. Joining me on set is Susan Page, already laughing at that comment, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, Mo Elleithee, Democratic strategist and Executive Director of the Georgetown University Institute of Politics and Public Service, and former Illinois Congressman Republican Rodney Davis. They mixed up the seats, but now everybody's back in the same place. We got all of our party IDs in. So, Susan, you heard there from the Speaker trying very hard to make the argument that this impeachment inquiry is legal, not political. As we said from the outset, there's no such thing in impeachment. What is your view of the legal and political imperatives facing the Speaker and his majority in this moment?
Well, he might want to work on those talking points, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who kind of chuckled at the idea that they're embarking on this impeachment inquiry as a legal matter. They're embarking on this impeachment inquiry to try to find some evidence for impeachment, which they don't have yet. So I think for Democrats, at least, that strikes them as a little backwards.
Rodney, once you start an impeachment inquiry, there are two ways out of it. You vote on articles that you draft, or you do something else. The something else is the open question. I want to play for you your colleague Don Baker, former colleague Don Bacon, had to say about this, and ask you about it on the other side.
If the inquiry is authorized, is impeachment inevitable? Would this be?
I don't think so. Frankly, my thought, and I may be an outlier on this, I think it's more important to have this information for the elections. Let's let the voters decide.
So is there a chance when you get to the end of the inquiry that there won't be articles of impeachment?
Yeah, I think that's probably more likely than not.
So I'm interested in that question, in that answer, but also in that question, the idea of the end of the inquiry. If there's not articles of impeachment, how does this end?
Well, if there's not articles of impeachment, then it's over.
Is it get dismissed? Would House Republicans really functionally acquit President Biden in an election year?
Well, listen, I'm going to have to disagree with my former colleague, Mr. Bacon, here. I think once this inquiry begins, that it's inevitable that we'll see articles of impeachment. But this isn't anything new that I've said. I said this back when the very political impeachments against Donald Trump were pushed forward, and you may have heard me say it, Garrett.
I did.
This is going to lead to political impeachments every single time in our nation from here on out, when we have a different party in the White House and a different party in the House.
You get the rare Meet the Press gold medal for consistency on a question on this, so I do appreciate that. Mo, how should the Biden White House and the Biden campaign be addressing this, to the degree that there are different imperatives here for each?
Yeah, look, I think what's important for the president's team to do, this is an opportunity for them to draw an even bigger contrast with House Republicans. While we're out there focused on the economy, while we're out there trying to move the country forward, this is the nonsense that they are focused on. And use that as an opportunity at a time when the president's own approval ratings are low, to point to the contrast, which is something he's always trying to do. And I think House Republicans are playing right into that trap, and they're painting themselves into a political corner. Because one of two things happens. They either draft articles of impeachment, which will make their base very happy, but will not satisfy the needs of I think, independent voters and swing voters heading into the election, or they don't file articles of impeachment, which will make their base very unhappy. So either way, House Republicans are putting themselves in a very, very difficult situation, and the Biden team does have an opportunity here to use this as a point of contrast.
I want to talk about this Texas abortion case. I'm a Texan. I've been very interested in this story. And Susan, I want to ask you about something that Ted Cruz's opponent, Colin Allred, in the Senate race has said. He argues Ted Cruz supports the Texas law. He says this is the outcome. This is the result. This is what it looks like when it happens to real people. He goes on to say that Senator Cruz doesn't want to talk about it. Texas has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the nation. It's probably arguably the battleground for these kind of legal cases. Is this an issue that can take Colin Allred from a long shot to a real competitor in a state like Texas?
Well, Democrats have had a lot of hopes about statewide elections in Texas, and they always lose.
For my entire life,
yes.
basically. Yeah.
So, history would say, no, it won't. On the other hand, abortion has proved to be such a powerful issue since Roe v. Wade was overturned. In the case in Texas, I think even people who are opposed to abortion would look at this case and say, this is wrong. It is wrong to force this woman to give birth to a baby that's just going to die and put at risk her own fertility. What's your argument for that if you're if you're pro-life? So I think it's dangerous for Republicans, but I'm not sure it's enough in a state like Texas to actually let Senator Cruz be ejected.
Ted Cruz didn't want to talk about it, wouldn't answer me before the elevator door closed, but Nikki Haley took a question on it last night, which I thought was interesting. Let's play her answer and we'll talk about it.
You know I'm pro-life. I welcome the states that have become pro-life, but this is exactly why I've said you have to show compassion and humanize the situation. We don't want any women to sit there and deal with a rare situation and have to deliver a baby in that sort of circumstance any more than we want women getting an abortion at 37, 38, 39 weeks. We have to humanize this situation and deal with it with compassion.
Rodney, her answers have been much more nuanced on the issue of abortion than any of the other 2024 candidates. I wonder how you think a message like that resonates with Republican voters.
It resonates well, but the abortion issue is only going to be one of many very important issues right now. Right now, we talked about Texas. Can Democrats win in Texas? The Democrat will never win in Texas as long as the Biden administration continues to disregard the crisis at our border. Even they recognize it, but they're frozen and not doing anything. If they don't address the border crisis and the surge of millions of immigrants coming into this country unabated, nobody's going to be talking about abortion, the economy, or any of the other issues that Democrats want to talk about in the upcoming 2024 campaign.
What do you make of that, Mo? I mean, we've seen this in the last couple of elections, a lot of special elections, the idea of abortion getting elevated above other issues, kind of pulling Democrats along with it. It's one of the very few issues on which President Biden outpolls the alternative right now is on this abortion access issue. How do you see this cutting generally? In the context of what Rodney was just saying, there are so many other issues on the minds of American voters.
Yeah, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with the congressman. I think that this is an issue that does have staying power and can penetrate into the psyche of voters in a way that many others can't. That's not to say the economy won't be on their minds, and that's not to say the border won't be on their minds. But this will also be on their minds. And at a time when the election is expected to be very close, you could see states that shouldn't be close become even more so. You're going to see Republicans have to spend money in Texas. Maybe not enough to pull Ted Cruz, to eject Ted Cruz, but he's going to be in a much more competitive race because this is a visceral, personal issue for so many women, for so many families. Not to say the border isn't, but it's not just about the border anymore. In a lot of these places, this will be a big issue. We've seen that time and time again.
I covered the 2018 race very closely. I don't think Ted Cruz will get caught napping again in the same way that he did in that race in Texas, but it does seem to have potency here. And I wonder, Susan, is this an issue where the Biden campaign might look into, the hundreds of millions of dollars they're probably going to spend on this race and choose to elevate this issue against the guy who appointed the justices who overturned Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, absolutely. And you do have Donald Trump taking credit for appointing that Supreme Court and then not wanting to talk about what he supports now in terms of restricting abortion access. But I would say I think the administration also needs to do something about their policy on the border because that is also an incredibly powerful issue. And they are, I think, not comfortable at the place they're in right now.
Rodney, I'm going to give you the last bite of the apple here because we've gone almost 2 whole shows now without talking about the endorsement that happened in New Hampshire last night. Chris Sununu endorsing Nikki Haley. In previous cycles, the in-state governor of the major party endorsing somebody this late in the game would be a huge story. Will it matter in this race?
I don't think so. I think we know who the candidates are going to be in the general election. It's going to be a rematch between President Biden and President Trump. Look, I would hope we could get back to some sense of normalcy within the Republican primary process and that an endorsement like this would matter. But unfortunately, I think the president has coalesced support. He's been able to create this victimhood based upon the many indictments that he and his family are facing. And he's gaining support rather than losing it. So I don't think it'll help, but maybe. I mean, the Iowa voters are going to be the first to decide. If they surprise America like they have before, then I think it's anybody's game in New Hampshire. But right now, if I was going to the casino, I'd probably put my money on Trump.
I don't know if they'd give you very good odds on that. Wait, we got to leave it there. We got to go. The real tragedy is that we ran out of time to sing you happy birthday on set. The 3 of us will do it during commercial, though, so we'll leave it there. All right. Susan, Rodney, And Mo, thank you all for coming in. And after the break, wartime tensions and Washington. We are live in Israel with new developments in the war against Hamas, plus the latest on President Biden's meeting with hostage families at the White House. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Today, President Biden held his first in-person meeting with the families of 8 unaccounted-for Americans believed to be held hostage by Hamas. Speaking to reporters after the meeting, families thanked the president for his efforts to free those who remain in Gaza.
We felt that, and we felt before, and we were only reinforced in seeing and believing that we could have no better friend in Washington or in the White House than President Biden himself and his administration.
They are just not numbers, and they're just not faces. They are sons. They are sons. They are grandparents. They are mothers. And that is what the president and his team understand.
The meeting comes after Biden appeared to offer his harshest critique of the Israeli government yet, warning that Israel is starting to lose support around the world due to the, quote, indiscriminate bombing that takes place. Heavy fighting has continued throughout Gaza. The IDF said 10 of its soldiers were killed in action on Tuesday. And the aftermath of airstrikes could be seen throughout the Gaza Strip, including in Rafah, where many have fled from fighting. The dire humanitarian situation there continues to worsen, with shortages of food, of water, and of shelter, as displaced Palestinians also have to contend with the elements, as seen in this video shot by our NBC crew in Rafah earlier today. The UN calling the situation there, quote, a living hell. Joining me now in Tel Aviv is NBC's Hallie Jackson. So, Hallie, as we heard, the families of these American hostages seem satisfied with the American efforts to get the remaining hostages home. Yeah. What's the feeling like in Israel on that issue? And is there any indication of another temporary ceasefire to bring the remaining hostages home? Are the political conditions there?
Let me take the second piece of that question first. I think there is a desire, when you talk to hostage family members, of course, to see something happen. There's nothing concrete to point to, though, with perhaps one exception, and that is some of the travel that we're seeing now this week from Biden administration officials, specifically Jake Sullivan, Garrett, who is set to be here in Israel later in the week to talk with the prime minister, to talk with the Unity Wartime Cabinet now, maybe to try to put some pressure on to try to get these hostage negotiations restarted again. The potential for a temporary truce, because as you point out, as you have noted, the fighting has intensified with some of these places in Gaza just decimated here. What's so interesting to me being here, Garrett, is the way that many of these hostage family members that we're talking to are extremely engaged in what is happening back home where you are in Washington. Very attuned to the American political climate and some of the developments here, including, of course, President Biden's meeting that you talked about with some of those families of Americans who are still unaccounted for. I asked one woman here in Tel Aviv at a place called Hostage Square what her message to President Biden would be. Her sister Romy is believed to be held in Gaza. Here's what she told me.
It's my responsibility to take care of her life, her health, her well-being, and right now she's out of my reach. I don't have anything to do for her except from talking to you and other media and to say to him how much it's important to us what he's doing, how he's supporting Israel, how he's supporting the negotiation, the deal that was made last time, and for hopefully next deal that will be soon as possible.
And the posture militarily from Israel continues to be to hammer Gaza, to hammer Hamas until they are, in the words of Israeli officials here, until they are wiped out. We are seeing, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu in just the last couple of hours, Garrett, the last few hours, go to a security assessment with some of the special forces, and he talked about how this is the path forward. This is the move that they have to make here. Obviously, that is creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, as you laid out, with the Hamas-run health ministry saying that more than 18,000 Gazans have been killed, and also saying that vaccines for children have run out. So critical, of course, because of these warnings from international aid organizations that disease is spreading here. You mentioned that living hell quote that's getting a lot of attention, but the UN Palestinian refugee chief also said civil order is breaking down. And he said this, Garrett, and I thought this was interesting. He asked one of his staffers, how do you cope? How do you cope with being at a shelter, seeing this in Gaza? And this person told him, I go to a corner and I find a place that I can go cry 10 times a day, essentially. Garrett?
Dark stuff. Hallie, you talked about the idea that Israelis are attuned to what's happening in Washington. How is the Biden criticism of the military campaign playing in Israel?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, because remember, and this is like backdrop, 30,000 foot, sort of a bit of pre-war context, if we could even call it that here. Remember what was happening in Israel, the sort of big international news before this war began. It was those, for example, massive protests on judicial reform against Prime Minister Netanyahu's push to change the judiciary, right? Those big demonstrations that we saw. So that sort of sentiment existed before the war. There's obviously been this incredible moment of unity in Israel, and I say incredible meaning extraordinary, meaning unusual here with this wartime cabinet created. But there is, I think, this sense, and I've talked to people for a story that you're going to see in just a couple of days, actually. I talked to one Israeli, just to give you an anecdote about this, who said, listen, I believe in peace. I believe in life. And that is something that I've heard again and again from some of these Israelis who say, I want my family member home. I want my country to be at peace, but I also want other people to be at peace as well. Everybody just wants to be able to send their kids to school. And this is basically a direct quote from some of the folks I'm talking to. People just want to be able to raise their families. Now, obviously, the Israeli government has a mission here, and that mission, as we've seen it executed militarily, is to wipe out Hamas. There's been this question, what happens next? What happens then? And that's a question that's just not going away, Garrett.
All right, Hallie Jackson, thank you for your reporting on this. And still to come, new fallout in the fight against anti-Semitism on America's college campuses. I'll talk to a rabbi who resigned from Harvard's anti-Semitism committee in the aftermath of the university president's controversial testimony on Capitol Hill. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As the backlash over the congressional testimony from university leaders on anti-Semitism on college campuses continues, Harvard University is standing by its president, saying in a statement Tuesday that Claudine Gay will remain in her role. Gay apologized for her remarks before Congress in an interview with Harvard's student paper. Joining me now is Rabbi David Wolpe. He's a visiting scholar at the Harvard Divinity School who resigned from the school's anti-Semitism advisory group following that congressional testimony last week. So, Rabbi, if you would, just walk me through what was behind your decision. Was it entirely about that testimony, or was that just the last straw?
It was, I would say it was the last straw, in the sense that both, I felt that here was an opportunity for all the presidents to articulate some indignation, some fury about the fact that they lead these institutions that are iconic throughout the world, and the students are expressing intimidation and hate, and they should be angry and upset about that, and also articulate a vision about the kind of community they want. And unfortunately, instead, I think we got answers that nobody thought of as the answers of visionary leadership.
You're not advising the university anymore, but perhaps you'll advise our viewers. I mean, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from students, and what steps do you think Harvard should take to combat anti-Semitism on campus?
I want to say I actually am still advising.
Good.
I speak still to the administration and to the committee and to students and alumni and faculty. And I think there is a sort of a coalescing agreement, but it has to be done. One is you have to enforce the policies that exist. Students can't harass other students. Students can't intimidate other students. They can't do the kinds of activities of breaking into classes and so on. Faculty shouldn't be giving political diatribes in classes. There should be education about the history of Jews and Judaism. I mean, you have people at these places saying Jews have no connection to Israel, and in 2 weeks, they're going to be singing about Jesus in Bethlehem. And I want to say to them, don't you think like
you know where that is, right?
There?
Yeah.
Maybe. And then finally, I think that we need serious, sustained training for students in how to speak to one another about things you disagree with.
Why do you think this issue of anti-Semitism on college campuses has captured so much attention in this moment? Is it just the war, or is that too simplistic? I mean, you talked about the sort of ahistorical context for a lot of anti-Semitic approaches people take to this issue, but expand on that a little bit, if you would.
It's a great question. The truth is, Harvard, as articles coming out have demonstrated, has a long history of anti-Semitism. They're not the only college campus that has that, but they do. And I think that this was just a flashpoint where people who had been seeing this for a long time finally said, look, this is what I'm talking about. It's now so blindingly obvious that you can't ignore it anymore. For Jews in America, I mean, we remember anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. We remember Pittsburgh and Poway and attacks on synagogues and a 400% increase in anti-Semitism in the last year. And Jews are 2% of the population and 60% of the hate crimes. So this is an opportunity, I think, for the world to see what it is that we're confronting and hopefully to address it.
Harvard has said it's going to stand behind its president. The president of Penn, who was in that same hearing, resigned. Do you think President Gay should stay? You know, to the degree this is part of that answer, is the problem her, or is the problem the policies or the lack of policies that we were just discussing?
So I'm a wise enough rabbi to stay out of politics in person.
Okay.
I don't pronounce on what a university should do for its administration, but I will say this, which is removing or placing one person alone is not going to solve this issue. It is cultural. It's part of the system. It has to be addressed. And now Harvard has an opportunity to make a real leadership difference in the campus community and in the world. And I really do pray that they step up to that.
Right. Here's an elite university with 100% name recognition in a spotlight on an issue people care about. If that's not an opportunity to make a difference, I don't know what is. Rabbi David Wolpe, I'm glad you'll still be there to continue giving them advice. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. Kristen will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Tom Costello right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.